I am a resident PhD student, so like Professor Min, I'm also outside of my field, and the topic of water took me even farther outside of my field. So this isn't a response paper so much as it is just reflections on some questions that this topic raised. In the documentary Blue Gold, World Water Wars, narrator Malcolm McDowell notes, "When we search the universe for life, we search for water, because it is only from liquid water that all known forms of life exist." In his paper, The Water Faith of Korean New Religions, Yoon-tae Jo reminds us that this is not just a modern scientific understanding of the importance of water, but is also reflective of a basic, perhaps even innate, form of human understanding of the importance of water for life. An understanding that has often led people to venerate and even worship water, or at the very least to incorporate it into basic rituals in domestic and public settings. While I cannot add or detract from anything he has said about water in these various new religions in Korea in terms of their ritualistic use, his paper does raise for me interesting questions about the relationships between religion, politics, national identity, and the environment that are worthy of further reflection and discussion. In his paper, Jo describes the ways in which water is incorporated into the ritualistic practices of various new religions in Korea, most of which in some way continue ancient indigenous practices. It is perhaps not a coincidence that he describes Won Buddhism, one of the three religions that do not incorporate water into their rituals, as being so focused on spreading its religion to all people that it does not stress the Chongsu faith. It is, I imagine, quite often the case that religions that spread beyond their original geopolitical borders soon abandon practices tied to their original ethnic and political boundaries, and take on new practices and beliefs from the new environments they penetrate. As a scholar of early Christianity, this reminds me of the varieties of early Christianity, which some scholars have mapped out based on the extent to which they seem to have incorporated Jewish beliefs and practices, or the extent to which they incorporated Greek and Roman beliefs and practices. While such studies run the risk of essentializing various streams of influence and rarely show enough respect for the complexities of cultural and religious syncretism, they persist as second-order attempts to classify and map religious growth and change. These new Korean religions themselves reflect a complex history of religious syncretism on the Korean peninsula, and I'd be interested to learn more about the relationship between contemporary Korean identity and national pride and the continuation of the Chongsu faith and other similar practices within these new religions, especially as they come to bear on more pressing ecological and political issues to which I now turn. In the last part of his paper, he suggests that new religions in Korea ought to contribute to the environmental movements to combat water pollution and to harness energy from water in ways that will aid in promoting world peace. As a native Californian who is well aware of the precarious position that California is in when it comes to water and water management, I cannot help but see the current water crisis as one of the most pressing, though perhaps least appreciated, factors contributing now and in the future to conflicts between states, nations, tribes, between all people. It is important for us to understand the nature of this problem and to consider the ways in which religious traditions that teach a faithful respect of water for life and for its place in assuring world peace can contribute to spreading knowledge of the importance of good water resource management and of ensuring that all people have access to enough water to sustain themselves and their communities. The current water crisis, not just in California but all over the planet, is quite distressing and is only going to get worse if governments do not take swift action to remedy the numerous factors contributing to the problem. Already, nearly 1 billion people do not have access to safe drinking water. 2.5 billion people do not have adequate sanitation services, and 1.6 million people a year die because they do not have access to safe water. These numbers are striking, but they are growing. Despite being the one planet in the entire known universe that is covered in water, only 1% of that water is actually available and useful for our drinking, sanitation, and manufacturing purposes. That 1% is normally replaced in cycles, but that cycle is being stressed by long-term droughts, overpopulation, pollution, and simple mismanagement. Lakes, reservoirs, and rivers that have long been depended on for their life-giving water are now so polluted that they only bring illness and even death. Other sources are drying up and disappearing. This has an effect not only in the immediate future on those populations most directly affected, but it also has long-term effects on the price and availability of food and other agricultural products. It also means higher prices for other manufactured goods, many of which use far more water to make than people realize, including, for example, a gallon of gas, which requires 5 to 7 gallons of water to be produced. In the full version of his paper, Joe talks about the miraculous story of the execution of Jae-woo Choi, which was foundational for giving meaning to the Chongsu faith. It reminds me of another Korean martyr, the farmer and activist Kyung-hae Lee, who protested against the World Trade Organization in an effort to protect South Korean farmers from the unfair trade policies of the WTO, including the effects of these trade policies on water usage in South Korea and by South Korean farmers. In 2003, Lee stabbed himself in protest of the WTO, becoming a martyr in the eyes of many in the anti-globalization movement. Both of these martyrs remind us of the importance of water as a basic element necessary for life, and of the importance of caring for the downtrodden who need the support of others to ensure their rights and their access to even the most basic of human needs. Korea has a long history of both respecting water and of fighting against unjust governmental and intergovernmental practices that exploit the disenfranchised and the powerless for the benefit of corporations and other elites. What then might these new Korean religions do to promote a certain reverence for water as something all life requires, and to encourage other citizens all over the globe to become aware of the dangers of not taking care of our water resources and of each other? Perhaps more to the point, can they do this while engaging non-Koreans in a way that will transcend differences of national and cultural background? Are the more globally oriented religions, such as Won Buddhism, necessarily going to move away from such sentiments about water, or can the Unification Church perhaps model a way in which promoting sound water management and spreading their message abroad go hand in hand? If the Unification Church is to provide a model, can it be done apart from their own privatized claims to certain sources of water, or other forms of corporation-like control over water? As someone who is well aware of the general lack of respect for water or for the water crisis, including the privatization of water among most American citizens, my hope would be that interreligious dialogue could lead not just to the promotion of certain abstract theological ideas or ethical values, but also to promoting social justice and environmental activism, especially on this most important of topics. Reverence for water is not all that is required for peace when the lack of water so readily threatens violence and war. If these religions hope to bring peace to Korea and to the world, then I hope to see them do more to tap into the other Korean virtues of political protest and social justice advocacy, to engage others in working with them for the betterment of all people.
The conference dialogue. I'm one of the many Kim Sang-il disciples. I would say I met him in the very later part of my PhD program, particularly about the Donghak process studies. This paper I presented to you, it's about more than 40-some pages, so I'm not going to read the whole part. It will be radically cut short, but I will try to share with you the thoughts and the concepts I believe something should be discussed in the context of the religious studies. You have my paper in the booklet. We skip the first page. The lamentable aspect in conducting studies about Korea's discourses with other traditions is the lack of English materials on Korean intellectual, philosophic, and religious traditions. Hence, the virtual absence of Korean academic materials and the serious misrepresentation of Korean thought and tradition within Western academia, media, and popular knowledge. So this paper, therefore, is an attempt to invoke interreligious, intercultural, and inter-philosophical dialogues between Korean traditional religions and intellectual traditions with non-Korean traditions, particularly with the Western traditions. In order to pursue that end, this paper will pay special attention to a comparative and analytical study of Donghak thought in comparison with that of Western traditions, specifically the process philosophy. In this paper, I will mainly intend to introduce your disciple, the Professor Kim Sang-il. The Kim Sang-il's lifelong, I call lifelong and never-ending academic work on his, it's my language, holistically inclusive, holistic inclusion, inclusive inter-thought and inter-civilization, or inter-religious, philosophical, and cultural dialogues between the East and the West, the North and South, and the old and new, and the past and the future, and so on. Therefore, can I have a water bottle? Through the eyes of Kim Sang-il, this paper introduced a Korean modern religious experience called Donghak, literally meaning Eastern learning or Eastern studies, that is indigenous and authentic to Korean people and culture. Thank you very much. The contemporary Korean philosopher, it is how I call him, one of the most distinctive Donghak scholars. And Han thought expert, Kim Sang-il, claims that soon the founder of the Donghak movement, philosophical logic can be summarized as holistic inclusion, 통전적 포함. According to Kim Sang-il, this holistically inclusive logic, or Han thought, is the most important, the most characteristically authentic Korean thought tradition. That Korean thought tradition, that is holistic inclusion, is dynamically present throughout Korean thought traditions and throughout Soon's revolutionary thought as well, particularly in Soon's holistically inclusive concept of heaven, 지기, 각, 천주. This holistic inclusion can also be called Korean Han thought. This notion or ethos of Han is the most representative or core or key character of Korean cultural and religious traditions. Thus, in this respect, the Donghak is a Korean religion that is faithfully indigenous to the Korean thought and religious tradition. It seems indeed almost all Korean traditional religions, including cultural traditions and Korean personalities of who we are, in general, are holistically inclusive. Otherwise, those religions could have not become Korean religions, cultures, and or traditions. There is Korean shamanism, Korean Buddhism, such as Won Buddhism, Korean Confucianism, Korean Taoism, Korean Christianity. Unless any religion, no matter where it may come from, either foreign or domestic, becomes Koreanized or indigenized, unless any religion becomes Koreanized, it cannot survive. It cannot continue to exist and function as a popular Korean religion or a popular Korean tradition. So I contend that this process of Koreanization or indigenization of any foreign religion is syncretistic, which is a normal, not abnormal, process to all religions, cultures, and or traditions around the globe. This issue of syncretism will be further discussed in this paper, but I'm not going to talk more about it. Han thought and holistic inclusion. I will skip the part. I will begin after the Kim Sang-il's definition. He quotes from An Sang-ho about what Han means. That the quotation, a lot of new meanings have been added to the early definitions of the word Han. According to An Hosang, the current definitions of Han as follows: great, east, bright, oneness, unification, people, old, wholeness, beginning, Han people, white, light, high, saying, many, sky or heaven, long, great leader, up, king, perfect, and inclusiveness. That's what Han definitions according to the dictionary. According to the Korean English Dictionary, the word Han implies 6 different meanings as follows. First, Hana, the one, meaning one, that is 한해, the 1 year, meaning a year. The second, 같은, meaning the same, that is 한 집에, meaning in the same house. The third, 온, meaning whole, that is 온 겨울, meaning throughout the winter. The fourth, 한창, meaning the peak, that is 한겨울, meaning midwinter. 한가운데, meaning the middle, that is 한밤, meaning midnight. 약, meaning approximately, that is 한 10분, meaning about 10 minutes. Quote, unquote. Han can also mean or be interpreted in the English language is being holistically inclusive. Both Han and being holistically inclusive may seem paradoxical to non-Korean traditions, but paradox is one of the key characteristics of broader Eastern thought traditions as well. It is well known that thought and truth claims in Buddhism and Taoism are often paradoxical. This Korean Han thinking is similar to other paradoxical Eastern ways of thinking, but not, according to Kim Sang-il, not identical, which I agree with him. Koreans and Eastern people as a whole have both similarities and differences. The notion of being inclusive is not limited to Koreans and Korean thought. It is generally universal in the Eastern way of thinking. Nevertheless, according to Kim Sang-il, the Han characteristic is present uniquely in Korean thought. The notion of Han, or holistic inclusion, holistic inclusivity, is specifically opposed to the notions of being dualistic, which is typically characterized as either or, and thereby antagonistically, exclusively, or disjointedly compartmentalized. However, Han, or holistically inclusive thought, is not necessarily exclusive of dualism. Dualism can be a part of inclusive holism. It seems it's like a joke in language. So allow me to go further, but not the other way around. One could argue dualism can be critically harmonized and thereby symbiotically synthesized in Korea's holistically inclusive or Han way of thinking. However, this Han or holistically inclusive way of thinking is intrinsically social scientific logic, is in my own interpretation. It is social, politically, economically, and culturally oriented as well. One could further argue the Han thought or inclusive holism can be characterized as an open-minded, broader, naturally thereby intrinsically inclusive and flexible. So I will skip the next 2 pages. I will go down to the sub-theme, the Kim Sang-il's constant dialogues with other thoughts and traditions. Kim Sang-il and like-minded Donghak scholars assert that the Donghak's concept of heaven, God, is decisively instrumental not only to the birth of 1894 Peasant War, but also to subsequent social revolutions that have emerged throughout Korean history. In this regard, Kim suggests this Donghak's holistically inclusive concept of heaven, God, together with process, thought, and other like-minded holistic thought traditions should become as an alternative, yet not exclusive, world philosophy for our deeply and endlessly antagonistic, divided, and troubled world. He, Kim, joins many others who believe that the world is producing never-ending conflicts, especially within the religious realm. In many cases, conflicts that are among different and even within the same religions are intrinsically destined to collide with each other due to their competing, dualistic, and thereby exclusive and judgmental characters as to their concepts, views of God. One distinctive example can be found in those religions that are monotheistic, 유일신론, due to their either-or, that is, absolutist and exclusivist nature, often accompanied with a superior, thereby arrogant mindset that originated from absolutist and monotheistic concepts. These human-made conflicts can hardly be avoided. According to Kim Sang-il, these traditions seem to lack, in most cases, logical balance in their respective concepts of the gods. This imbalance in their concepts of the gods consequently creates predictable conflicts among competing contemporary religions. Most religions in human history, particularly during the quote-unquote axial period, 8th century to 2nd century BCE, can be divided into two general camps. The first camp is generally, we may say, hierarchical, monotheistic, paternalistic, and ascribes personal concepts to God. Western Christianity, Islam, and Judaism may belong to this first category. The second camp is known for its impersonal, less paternalistic, natural, polytheistic, pantheistic, and less hierarchical concepts of heaven. Most Eastern religions, such as Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, may belong to this second category of faith tradition. This paper relies, I will skip. This is the main reason why this paper attempts to introduce extensively Kim Sang-il's academic accomplishments and his endless engagements with other diverse traditions of the world, particularly with the process and the Western scientific schools of thought. Kim's efforts to engage in constructive dialogues with other traditions have not been unilateral. Process thinkers have been active advocates, proponents, and productive academicians in dialogue with other traditions, particularly with the Eastern traditions. One of the most distinctive process thinkers, John Cobb Jr., who just left the room, argues this issue.
Coming back after lunch.
I know. So I'm honoring him in his role in the process theology, his work, who is, it feels better to talk about him when he's not here. How much he's been respected, honored among many, the Koreans and Asian, the other continents, particularly by the Kim Sang-il, and then the person like me, the owes to the leadership of John Cobb in his process theology movement. So again, honoring him, even if he's not here, John Cobb argues this issue in the following way. I quote Cobb. the traditional cultures of Asia and Africa do have a permanent and needed contribution to make to humanity as a whole becomes more apparent with the passing of each year. Religiously, there is profound dissatisfaction with the various forms of contemporary Christianity and a turning to the East. The turning to the East has been primarily to India, to China, and to Japan. Korea has been seen as a satellite of a Chinese culture, which in some respects attained its fullest development in Japan. Even Koreans were forced for some time to accept this pejorative account to their tradition and culture, and this may account in part for their enthusiastic and successful adoption of Western ideas and religion. But fresh historical research is leading to a quite different picture. Kopp continues, far from being a satellite Chinese culture, he says Korea is the heir of the earliest form of that culture and has preserved and developed it with peculiar richness. Much of what has been appreciated in Chinese thought has its fullest and purest embodiment in the culture and heritage of Korea. Especially in its religious life, Korea combines the most thorough acceptance of modern Western Christianity of any Asian country and also the purest form of the most ancient East Asian tradition. I quote from Professor John Kopp. The beginning of this new millennium has already sufficiently warned us that the present world we face is not any less challenging or dangerous than previous centuries, or even centuries of the Middle Ages. Vicious repetition of the old paradigm of hegemonic power and colonial domination has endlessly perpetuated those inequalities that have ruled in past centuries. John C. Raines, a respected Christian ethicist with progressive theological philosophical views, prophetically predicted more than 30 years ago in his book, Illusions of Success, 1975, the aforementioned but still potent social reality that continues to threaten human societies and the world. I quote, "For we live in a society that is steeply unequal, where most of the effective, that is discretionary wealth, and therefore the power is frozen at the top. Yet this reality is disguised as right, good, and only natural by the myth of freedom of opportunity. More fundamentally, we need a more equal society. Always true, but even more true today. Democracy cannot long survive our continuing inequalities. The alternative is tyranny, survival imposed from above. We do not need to go that way, but without basic change, we will." I will skip the whole part. And how many minutes? How long I have the rest? 5 minutes? 3 minutes?
Yeah.
7 minutes.
7 minutes
7
left.
minutes.
Yeah.
7 minutes. I will skip all the way back to the Donghak's concept of heaven, God, Shicheonju. One of the most revolutionary, unique aspects of Donghak's new religious and philosophical teachings was Soon's concept of heaven God, which is both anthropocentric and theocentric, or process language panentheistic God, panentheistic, and thereby holistically inclusive. This concept is neither solely Eastern nor solely Western. Rather, it includes both the traditionally Eastern impersonal and the traditionally Western personal dimensions, symbiotically balanced and harmonized, I call. Soon offered his followers a dynamically dialectic, holistically inclusive and progressively organic concept of heaven God. It is my reading. Soon term this concept of heaven God, 시천주, literally meaning receive or serve Lord of Heaven God in one's life. I will skip the next page. The Lee Hyung-rae interprets Soon's 시천주 concept as 동학's most important and fundamental thought. God in this 시천주 is the one and the same God to all people, regardless of race, gender, and class. This God is the same God for all, either God of the ruler or God of the ruled. Who makes any differences in the status God is not God, but humans. 천부경 begins with one and it ends with one. Two, infinite and finite, finite endlessly follow one after the other. In infinite, the finite exists. In the finite, infinity exists. The process of one becomes many, and many becomes one, is the principle of creation. One is many, and many are one. Lee contends that 동학 philosophy is essentially a movement to implement a thought that all humans come from the same root. Herein, Lee concludes that the force behind the 동학 movement's primary goal of social transformation is aimed to dismantle any class-oriented social system that dehumanizes and it discriminates against other humans. He characterizes the 동학 movement as a movement to liberate the oppressed and lead them to an equal and just society. He asserts that 동학 is not something that all of a sudden came into historical being. This historically inclusive, 민중-centered, and liberation-oriented thought is a worldwide that has descended to us from the early ancestors of our nation. And I will skip all the way, like Kim Sang-il. He interprets his reading of 동학 from the Korean Han-thought tradition in terms of 동학's holistically inclusive, in other words, mutually exchangeable concepts of heaven, God, one and many, and whole and part. Kim Sang-il, Lee Hyung-rae, and other like-minded 동학 scholars generally agree that Soon's concept of heaven, God, 시천주, is a 민중-centered, liberation-oriented, and socially transformative religious revolutionary concept that declares the dignity of human beings. Humans are godly beings, and Soon's already radically egalitarian and liberation-oriented thought was further developed into egalitarian and liberationist thoughts such as Haewol's 사인여천 and William's 인내천 thought. Soon's anthropocentric but holistically inclusive, both personal and impersonal concept of heaven, God, was further radicalized by its successor, who was able to survive for the next 30 years as the second leader of this new religious, revolutionary, and social-political movement, Haewol, Choi Si-hyung, who was from the low servant class, was not educated and did not know how to read and write. However, he was brilliant, hardworking, and considered even more progressive than his predecessor. In his interpretations, applications, and practices of his teachers' founding thoughts and writings, under this second long-lasting and charismatic leadership, the 동학 revolution rapidly grew and spread throughout a large part of the southern and central provinces of Korean Peninsula. The revolution grew exponentially during his 25 years of exemplary, tireless, and underground revolutionary leadership until his death by, like his predecessor, by execution in 1898. During this time, he became deeply committed to working for and working with mainly poor and oppressed people, and particularly concerned himself with women's and children's issues. He further developed his teachers' 시천주 concept of heaven God into a more anthropocentric an egalitarian idea of 사인여천, literally meaning treat other human beings as heaven God. Haewol's concept of heaven God had been fashioned as a more ethically oriented and practical set of guiding principles for living a dedicated daily life. This is in contrast to the first 수훈 시천주 and the third 송병희's concept of inne천, which seem to have been created in the context of a more metaphysically oriented philosophical theology. The 사인여천, however, shows the revolutionary and egalitarian nature of Haewol's concept. I will stop. 3 minutes. Oh, thank you. I have still 3 minutes. I will just skip. 인내천. In the early 20th century, 송병희 assumed the third leadership, and then he was so highly educated both in Korea and Japan. His interpretation and transmission of the teachings, he declared an even more anthropocentric, egalitarian, and progressive concept of heaven God, called 인내천, literally meaning human. We are heaven God. Human is heaven, as the official religious concept of God in his 천도교, literally meaning religion of the heavenly way. This designation of 인내천 as the official concept of heaven God has become quite controversial even among the Dongak followers. One of the main questions in the controversy surrounding this radically egalitarian concept of heaven God is whether it is a humanistic concept or not. Kim Sang-il is joined by a number of Dongak scholars who conclude this 인내천 concept has a strong anthropocentric element. However, Kim asserts that Dongak philosophy should not be misunderstood as the only anthropocentric concept. This controversy, if I continue, then I will be assassinated. So I will stop here and go to the conclusion all the way to the end. It is apparent that Dongak's revolutionary spirit may have been deeply embedded in the Korean people's hearts and minds, whose souls were yearning for liberation and self-determination. Dongak was examined as a case study of Korea's socio-political and religious, inter-religious, intercultural, inter-ideological, and inter-traditional tradition. This holistically inclusive, in other words, syncretistic, so if someone may call it, tradition has been an integral part of Korean national history. It's the foundation of Korea's organically dynamic, holistically inclusive, and progressively dialectical thought tradition. In this respect, Suwon was in the 19th century like Go-un, Chechiwon in the 9th century, faithful to this Korean tradition of holistic inclusion. So I would thus argue that Koreans can be, you are and we are, and our ancestors and our future generations can be considered as generally more open to and supportive of and even enthusiastic about the tradition of interreligious dialogue. Koreans, as they have been shaped by their own history, are poised to work at the forefront of the age of dialogue in order to advocate and promote interreligious dialogue. And I will skip that part and the final concept. In this context, let me stop it. I will, thank you. I will stop.
I'm so sorry, the moderator always take a bad role to for the good article. Can we, Dr. Wang? Yeah.
It's my honor to be here. I want to thank Professor Lee and Professor Yu for being here. I'm probably the only one Chinese here. So in order to make a big difference, I wear the color jacket.
I also come from China.
I'm very happy, Professor Jim, because we have shared something in common. I used to work for Chinese Academy of Social Science for 10 years.
Wow.
So that's probably, yeah. I think this paper It's a pretty very good paper, I have to say. It's really brand new, that's a lot of rich experience, a lot of rich information I learned today. So like Professor Cheng and his supervisor, Professor Kim, like a kind of archaeologist who dig something out. Yeah, I think that's a really good one. Yeah. Since I'm not, I leave this judgment to Korea friend to judge whether it's what's the religion, what is it? Yeah, I'm not expert at it. I want to share something of my personal reflection, like Professor Lee. I'm so happy, China, Korea today is working on the same direction, trying to critically appreciate the tradition. Because the Cultural Revolution, China already destroyed a lot of tradition. Yeah. I think that also historically, China and Korea, we have a lot of good time, bad time. Today become more and more closer, right? Every weekend, a lot of Korea people further fly to China to eat a barbecue and play golf. At the same time, a lot of Chinese are watching the Korea soap opera. You can see the world will become very, very intrinsically connected. So we should work together, find some way, to deal the really serious problem these people bring up, like ecological crisis, and also a lot of very like a hierarchy, a lot of very serious problems. Yeah. So it's one of the richer information I got from the Professor Zheng's paper about the new region called Donghak. Yeah. They used the 世人如天 that treated the human being like a god. I think this is a pretty good, valuable result. That's for if we want to creating a new model of democracy. I think this is a pretty very good result. As you know, the current form of democracy, I mean the westernized democracy, have a lot of problems. Yeah. But you can't totally abandon the Western democracy because there's some value inside. So in this way, probably the new religion, the new tradition can give some hint to how can comprehensive, also how to combine the two forms of tradition, create some new form of democracy. That is the one idea I got from Professor Zheng's lecture. Yeah. And then following, I want to ask a couple of questions. Those not some special questions, but just because I'm very curious about this new religion. Like the first question, I'm wondering the current situation. The current situation of the Donghak in Korea today. As what's the real situation today here? The close question is what's the attitude of the young generation toward this new tradition, the new religion? As you know, in China right now, the young generation, I never been to Korea, but I know China, the young generation, I think it's dominated by consumerism, and also the society is, scientism is very powerful. I'm wondering, the third question is about how about in Korea, what's the situation of scientism? Or how about for example, how the scientists regard or think about this new religion? That's another question. Yeah.
You say science?
Yeah, scientists. You can see the relationship between science and religion like that. Yeah. Like this special religion. And also the application of this religion to the society. For example, this last November, worked together with Professor Li Jingyuan and their Dazhen Zhenyu. We have a conference in Hainan about ecological civilization. They sent 4 very excellent scholars go to the China to join the conference. There they share the organic farming from their Dazhen, their tradition. So Chinese participant very, very welcome this idea. That kind of, I'm wondering, that's beside religion, there's some other application of this tradition to different field. For example, application to the meaning to education, agriculture, urbanization. That's the way we can keep a tradition alive. Not put it into a museum. Okay, that's a go-to. So that's the. I hope this is really some promising project. we can work together, to make it alive. Right now I'm working on a book. The name is Toward a Second Enlightenment, going to publish it by University Prize. So this as the first enlightenment, that means totally abandon, reject tradition. In the second enlightenment, I want to see that critically appreciate the tradition. So in this way, every tradition can help today have a human being solve the problem. Is very welcome. Yeah, that's why I'm very happy to see this religion appear. This is if you can answer, and later if no time, we can talk in private. There are some small minor questions. Because I'm very happy to see you put some Chinese there. like the page 40, the harmony, you translate into 调和, but the Chinese we like to translate into 和谐. And I think because the 调和has kind of little bit of a compromise word, so they kind of not so positive. 和谐is more positive. So if it's published in Chinese, I hope you translate this way, but very good. Another word like the page 28, you mentioned colonize. Yeah, that's a very complicated issue, the relation between China and Korean history. You can use the modern word colonial to describe the traditional relationship. Okay, I think like a big brother and little brother. Something. It's very complicated, so I think not why to use the modern word. Yeah. I realize that you made a big contribution in your paper. You try to de-Westernize. I think that's a very good approach. But on the other hand, we should be careful when we use some word like you use the word. Another word, the page 59, you use the anthropocentric. That is a pretty new word. Right now in the environmental movement, we use this word. In Confucian, that's the background. That is I think is a very purpose to use this word. Yeah, because that is I think we should put much emphasis on the benevolence, yeah, or like you mentioned the 世人如天, treat people as God. Right now, in China, the central government they use the new slogan, "Put the people first." I think that you can see the link to the Confucian tradition. I think that is good, rather than this anthropocentric is where to Westernized. So that is my minor comment.
Dr. Zhang, you have.
I should say.
1 minute to.
So I would not try to even say Europe and United States by Peter Lang Company. The beginning part of my dissertation, the paper, which touched about China, Korea as a satellite of China as Chinese. After 4 years of my living and teaching and working in China, my understanding of China has become very much changed in terms of we should approach to each other as a competitive, or we shouldn't approach to each other as competitive or superior or inferior or good or bad according to the past, whatever has happened in the past. Instead, we should move forward with more 和谐, harmonious, symbiotic, cooperating together based upon the future. We should work together to build the future where we can find some common ground. So neither or, neither China nor Korea, not either or approach, but both and approach. Both Korea and China, both East and the West, and both the old and new. We should be able to continue to dig in, as you said, dig into the ground to bring up the more communal, more supportive, more symbiotically harmonious way of living for the whole humanity. So that's where I stand now.
Yeah.
So don't worry about what I said. So again, the whole other issues we talk about during the lunch because I believe they don't have much time.
We are in a simple.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, brother. Come. Just tell the people who you are.
My name is Jochen Strack. I was a student here and recently became a nurse at Heidelberg.
My name is Kwangki Park and I'm
Speak louder. Thank you for your coming.
대승준이었습니다. 정지윤입니다.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 대승준의 김호입니다.
대승준에서 제민혜입니다.
반갑습니다. 저는 한강현입니다. 지금 신정기학회 회원으로 왔습니다. 그리고 성의재단에서 그 방송 일을 하고 있습니다.
북경에서 온 정종욱입니다. 감사합니다.
사모님이세요? 기열이의 better hand. Okay.
My name is Kim Do-gu from Korea. He's my wife.
Better hand.
I will speak in Korea. 저는 문선영입니다. 한국 성문대학에서 왔습니다.
I'm 현수 Park from 금강대도.
김방룡입니다. 충남대에서 왔습니다.
황인관입니다. 먹구대학에서 왔습니다.
Retired political science. 똑같습니다. Retired professor.
정희식입니다. LA에서 왔습니다.
Retired physician.
류기정입니다. 저도 은퇴한 사람입니다.
비타일
Professor.
고감식입니다. 경기도 포천 대진대학교에 왔습니다. 반갑습니다.
요거를 무슨 좋겠어요?
김철호입니다. 대순실에서 왔습니다.
From Korea.
예, 반갑습니다. 대순진리에서 왔습니다. 네, 류대현입니다.
반갑습니다. 대승진리에서 온 박정욱입니다.
I'm secretary of the Korean Academy of New Religions. If you have any questions, ask me.
He is the co-organizer. And 이거 보십시오. 이거 굉장한 그 페이퍼를 이렇게 가져왔습니다. Give him a big.
백승배입니다. 포모나 웨스턴드 교회에서 왔습니다.
포모나 됐어요.
홍성현입니다. 한민족교회 조정원입니다. 표회탄교회.
클레먼 대학원의 민경석 교수입니다.
안한영입니다. LA에 살고 있습니다.
정기열입니다. 반갑습니다.
You heard here. Very. Okay. 사모님.
김경옥입니다.
유기종 목사님의 사모님.
반갑습니다. LA에서.
파사데나에서 사는 임원교하고 노재량입니다.
물리학자들이 둘다.
피지시스트.
박사님도 다 아는데.
아이고, 이몽규 박사님. 아이고, 왜 이러세요? 너무 반갑습니다.
닥터인 파스티나.
한 사장님 왔습니다. 김상일입니다.
프로페서 킹.
Thank you, Zihi Wang,
닥터 왕.
China Project Director.
You see.
Okay.
So happy to see you.
안녕하세요. 고영훈입니다. 클리블랜드, 오하이오 클리블랜드 샀습니다.
Purpose
Hi,
four.
my name is Yanko. I'm an assistant professor of Lorraine College in Cleveland, Ohio.
네, 안녕하세요. 임예린입니다. 토렌스에서 왔습니다.
토렌스. 우리 김기대 목사님.
예, 저 미주종교평화협의 사무총장 맡고 있는 김기대 목사입니다. 예.
Sign
I'd like
professor.
to extend a warm welcome to all the visitors from Korea. I am an associate professor at Pomona College, one of the Claremont colleges. My name is Zain Qasim.
이슬람 계통 이슬람. Welcome, Zain.
예, 김재범입니다. LA에 있습니다. 마하스는 원장입니다. 조계정 국제포교사입니다.
김
예, 금강대도 김두한입니다. 반갑습니다.
고맙습니다. 지금 우리 굉장히 중요한 우리 로스앤젤레스 지역의 종교 지도자들로서 아주 귀중한 분들이 지금 막 도착하셨습니다. 우리 Korean American Religious Council for Peace, 한미 종교평화협의회 공동의장으로 계신 우리 김현철 스님하고 그다음에
One day in my dream, my grandmother died, but the following day, she really passed away. So why that happened? Well, Jung said this is not causal or unrelated. There's no causality, cause and effect. In those two moments, the Jung said, my mother's psyches communicate with me. So it is bounded. It is collective. It is beyond the personal religious experiences. So here, in order to support this, those are kind of the examples of his theory of synchronicity. So in order to support his concept of synchronicity, Jung argues the non-causal and non-rational dimensions of human experiences. And for supporting his theory of synchronicity, he introduced I Ching, the Book of Changes, as an example of these synchronistic principles. If you know the I Ching uses that's another dimension, just one kind of dimension of the I Ching methods, using arrow sticks or coins and pulse coins, and then here they try to interpret the outer event in relation to that psychic moment. So now, so I Ching, according to Jung, I Ching, the Book of Changes, represents the synchronistic relation between the psyche and the physical event. The psyche, inner psyche, and outer or external physical event, those are not separated. And that relation, which is irreducible to the causal principle developed in the mechanical paradigm and view of mind and nature. So now, Jung's notion of synchronicity is a form of his archetypal psychology, in which the preconceived pattern or the unconsciousness of the human psyche manifests itself. But I'm not spending much time on Jung's theory of synchronicity itself, but just let me introduce just the basic level of a synchronicity theory, and also his some philosophical sources, and then compared to Il-gu Kim's Zhongyang thoughts. Now, he said for the theory of synchronicity, Carl Gustav Jung now tries to verify that some paradoxical propositions can be both true and false, or either true or false in a complementary relation between the opposites of the conscious and the unconscious. The consciousness and unconsciousness are those two opposite Those are two opposite dimensions, according to you. In other words, if you, in the conscious state, if you try to be more rational, then in the unconscious, you become more emotional. So the more rational in the conscious state, the more emotional or non-rational in the unconscious state. So this kind of, here, so Jung's following the theory of synchronicity, or his concept of collective unconsciousness, then he said those are kind of, the synchronistic moment is kind of a sign for maintaining the balance between the conscious and the unconscious. So not too much rational, not too much non-rational. There should be a balance. So it's kind of a comprehensive method. Now, Jung says that the correspondence of the inner psyche to the external event is performed collective unconscious beyond the individual self. That means ego consciousness, definitely it is part of our consciousness, our mind, our psychic structure. But it is just part of our psyche. Below that, that the personal unconscious level we have, personal consciousness, it is forgotten material from my personal experience, especially when we were a child. In my childhood, I had, I experienced some moments, but that can be forgotten. But that forgotten material will not be gone. Still remain in the unconscious. That's kind of personal unconscious level. But now, beyond that, that instinct, Jung is Freud's student. Freud is a great significance. He's a great discovery. It was the instinct, the importance of the instinct. The instinct is also a great part of the human unconsciousness. But beyond that, there's a deeper dimension than instinct. That is collective unconsciousness. Everything is interconnected, and everything is bound. Here, even God is here interconnected with the everything in the level of a human unconscious and collective unconsciousness. So religious experiences or mythical experiences are coming from our collective unconsciousness. Well, he says the correspondence of the inner psyche to the external event is performed, the archetypal representation derived from collective unconsciousness. Now, here, so that one was not based on the causal relation. With the notion of a synchronicity, Jung attempts to show, again, the archetypal process of the human psyche that is deriving from the a priori form, or the primordial image, deeply rooted in the human unconsciousness. And also, Jung argues that the depth of the psyche is closely connected with the physical event. So although he's a psychologist, his theme is not limited to human inner psyche. His definition of psyche is not separate from the outer or the external events, especially in the collective unconsciousness. The inner psyche and the external event or physical event or the mind and nature are always interconnected in his concept of collective unconsciousness or the theory of synchronicity. In other words, the theory of, as I explained, the synchronistic moment is the example arising from the collective unconscious. So again, his theory of synchronicity is an attempt to theorize the non-causal dimension of the human experiences, irreducible to the cause and effect system of mind and nature. So here we can see, in contrast to the Newtonian Cartesian mechanical model, which is based on the, or always pursues the absolute knowledge of the objective reality, in that paradigm, the subject-object is always separated. His synchronistic model attempts to construct and balance and the balance of the opposite poles in the psychic contents and the interrelation between the psyche and nature. So in this context, the Jung's synchronicity as non-causal, again, as I said, those are not the causal relation, non-causal, what he calls acausal connecting principle can make a great contribution to the cross-cultural studies. Sure, the East Asian thought paradox is not simply the fallible or fallacy. The Buddhism and Confucianism, then we can see some paradoxical ideas. That paradoxical paradigm, I mean, the logic is always has been used as a thinking system, the basis of the thinking system. So here, in his development of the principle of synchronicity, this is my question. However, you adopt his reading sources. Actually, Jung's theory of synchronicity, challenge some Newtonian or Descartesian mechanical paradigm, but his reading sources, in my sense, in my opinion, sporadically dispersed. I mean, some of his arguments becomes problematic because in order to support the theory of synchronicity, he heavily depends on the Kantian epistemology. In other words, the Kantian, his critical theory, his critical philosophy, especially noumena. Because here Jung had a difficulty in explaining logically the synchronistic moment, the correspondence between the inner psyche and the external event. So here it is very hard within the frame of a scientific method. So now he borrowed the Kantian epistemology, so-called the noumena. In other words, Kant presents the noumena, the realm of noumena beyond the phenomena. The phenomena is dominated, or our physical world is dominated by time and space, and also causality. But theory of synchronicity is not based on the causality. So here, Kant also introduced the noumena. Actually, here the Jung argues that the Kantian noumena, beyond the time and space, that should be the basis to understand his own theory of synchronicity. But I think that's a problem. Here we see the contradictory sources. He brought the I Ching, the Book of Changes, East Asian scriptures, and also he also borrowed Kantian epistemology. But if you compare Kantian epistemology with I Ching, the Book of Changes, the main theme of the Book of Changes, then you can see there are a lot of differences. So here I raised some questions about Jung's source and Jung's understanding of Kant as well. But here I cannot spend the time, the critique of his reading sources of Kant himself. But again, Jung advocates for the spaceless and timeless outside the human reason and sense perception. So, and also the question is, as I raised in this paper, if he's right, because he referred to Chinese I Ching. Actually, he never known, although he's a contemporary of Kim Il-bu, but his reading source is definitely Chinese I Ching. But then my question is, Chinese I Ching, if Chinese I Ching really supports his theory of synchronicity. So here I'm trying to explain his theory of synchronicity in terms of Kim Il-bu's Zhang-Yok thoughts. Now here, let me explain this first. Jung says, Jung affirms that the self is developed in the paradoxical relation between the opposite poles. So the self does not indicate a state without paradoxes, but the balance between paradoxes. Here the difference between Jung and Kant can be examined on the basis of Aristotle's law of a contradiction. Here, of course, Kant found the big problem of the Aristotle's law of the contrast. But again, his antinomy also support Aristotle's laws. But now, here let me introduce this. Again, this is one of the main themes of his theory of synchronicity, non-directional topology. You also mentioned that to support his theory of synchronicity, non-directional. Actually, our consciousness is directional, but unconsciousness is non-directional. But here he found some wisdom sources, great insight of human mind is from non-directional system. Actually, Freud raised that issue, and Jung developed the non-directional topology. Now, the unconscious and undirected thinking, undirected, forms a periphery or fringe field to Euclidean directed thinking. So now you found the significance of non-directional, non-Euclidean way. So here, I think this is a great matchable with the Zhongyup thought. Then also the question is, can we find the non-directional, non-Euclidean way from the Chinese I Ching? Let me explain this King Wen's chart of the 8 trigrams, one of the examples in Chinese I Ching system. And also before this, I and that I'm going to stop. That's what. No, 이거 말고 전 페이지요. 전 페이지. 네, 아니. Previous page. Yes, Fu He. Yeah, Fu He. He was regarded as the first Chinese king. He's a mythical figure. Don't have any historical documents, but his thoughts and his ideas just transmitted through the material of I Ching. But here, Fu He chart of, so here, now I just introduce the basic thoughts of Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity, and also his finding of significance of non-directed way, collective unconsciousness, and also non-Euclidean way. And then here, let me concentrate on I Ching. I Ching, why is it? I Ching is very important in Carl Gustav Jung's theory of synchronicity, because he's heavily dependent on this, the Chinese I Ching system. But then the question again, if this is really non-directional or non-Euclidean ways, there's a little, well, actually, as you know, this is, I Ching is kind of a numeric system. I cannot fully explain all these systems, but here, just the basic pattern of this diagram, which is called the Fu He's chart of the 8 trigrams. But then he matches this odd number and even number. In the I Ching system, this is the basic assumption. The odd number means yang, and even number means yin. So here, he made a pair between odd and even. This is good. Here, the basic thoughts of the I Ching system is based on the harmony between the opposites. The harmony between the subject and object, the harmony between the even and odd. In other words, the harmony between the yin and yang. So here he matches, make a pair, correspond the even and odd. So he now attempts first here kind of a non-Euclidean way, making a pair and harmony between the opposites. But now if you see the number system, here 1, 2, 3, 4, and the other way 5, 6, 7, 8, then you can see directional way. right? Probably Jung didn't know that, right? Didn't analyze this kind of system. So here, this is kind of an ideal type. In other words, ideal type of harmony between the opposites. But it is ideal. Sometimes in our world, in our actual world, we see a lot of these harmonious events. And so this is ideal type just before it meets the actual world. Now later, King Wen developed another 8 trigrams, but now he changed. This is different way. Now look at this. The 9, 1. He matched this in the numeric system. 3, 7, 4, 6. Now they are even and odd and odd. So now there is no. I mean, this is not a harmony between the opposites. He matches and correspond the even to another even and yang to another yang. So this means separation between the subject and object. The separation between God and the world. So separation between the mind and nature. So here this, so this is, then you can see completely different from the Fuhi, King Wen. But now, let me introduce this, Il-bu, Kim's Korean I Ching thinker, the chart of the 8 trigrams. Then you're going to see he now again seems to return to Fuhi's method. 5 and 2. Now the 1 and 6 and also 7, 2 and 6, 9. Now he tried to match even and odd, even with odd, and also odd and even. So make a harmonious relation between the opposites. But yeah, that's what the Fuhi already made in his 8 trigram chart. But now look at this is what makes a difference. Then now look at this. This is not directional. And this is non-directional. Now the 7 to 8. And also 5, 4. Actually, this is clockwise. But now here, and this 7, 8. Now this is counterclockwise. So now this is the very important data, especially for reading the development of I Ching systems. Now he tried to make a harmony between the opposite, and also here he showed a non-directional way. Then why is that important? Directional, non-directional. What does that mean? What is the significant point from the directional, non-directional discussion? And also, yeah, then I return to Carl Gustav Jung and briefly compare these two thoughts, and then I finish. Again, as I said, here Kim's 8 trigrams enhance the relation between the opposites by breaking any directional order. So that does not mean just simply chaos or confusion. Non-directional order has a different meaning. From this paradigm shift, from the Chinese I Chings, Kim tried to overcome the hierarchical order. The hierarchical order of all things. So Sang-il Kim, actually, he's been my teacher since my undergraduate school. So I'm a little awkward with calling his name. I always his title. But he and he said he said the Kim Il-bu's Jung Yuk-do is a non-Euclidean. This is non-Euclidean. In other words, it implies the 4-dimensional world by breaking a barrier between the front and back, and right and left, and above and below, and inside and outside, like a Möbius strip and Klein bottle, and more than that. So here, now it's like a connecting the contrast of contrast of contrast. It's keep connecting the contrast. That's very important point in his thoughts. Well, Kim Il-bu made his Jeongyuk-do in the 19th century, in which period the Euclidean method has been greatly challenged by non-Euclidean way in the West. Whereas the Euclidean geometry is directional, the non-Euclidean geometry is non-directional. So again, straight lines, square, rectangle, cylinder is all directional, whereas a Möbius band, a Klein bottle, or projected plane is not directional, non-directional. So here then the Sang-il Kim points out that this is why Kim Il-bu calls his Jeongyuk-do the world of mirrors. The world of mirrors, that means the things are reflected into one another by connecting the opposites. This connection can be a philosophical source for Jung's theory of synchronicity. I think, in my opinion, Jung tried to now show that, breaking the barrier between the opposite in his theory of synchronicity. Everything is, every barrier is fall down. The inner psyche and outer event, and in the collective unconsciousness, there is no subject and there is no object. Even God in the world, there's no, all the barriers are just broken down in that world. That world can be compared to Kim Il-bu's the world of mirrors. So here again, the synchronistic moment, which is formed by the encounter between the conscious and the unconscious, and mind and nature, the inner psyche and physical event, is based on the mirror, the world of mirrors. So again, Jung's theory of synchronicity cannot be explained by any hierarchical structure between the opposites that we can see from the Chinese I Ching in some sense. Of course, I'm not completely criticizing the Chinese I Ching systems. Definitely, they had great contributions to raise the thoughts connecting the opposites. But here, it's not fully developed. It is a direction. Perhaps the original purpose of I Ching is connecting all the opposites. Now it is completed in his Kim Il-bu's thoughts. He constantly connect the opposites and then make a non-directional. But non-direction is not chaotic situation. It is order, non-directional order. That's what I like. Non-directional order. In other words, there is no hierarchical systems. Everything is equal, and then all the barriers are falling down. They keep order. So it is not here, for example, the subject and object different. Actually, subject-object, the integration is very important theme in I Ching. Then you can see in Fuhi's pattern, Fuhi's I Ching, 8 trigrams, then you can see non-differentiation between the opposites. Actually, he made a harmony between the opposites, but here, that's before the encounter with the actual world. But King Wen's 8 trigrams that we're going to see some subject-object separation. It is differentiation. It is difference. But now here, Kim Il-bu, he tried with transdifferentiation. In other words, the re-encounter between the subject and object after connecting the contrast. So here the Jung's theory of synchronicity seeks a different path from the traditional model of the West that is based on the scientific rationality with the absolute certainty in the Newtonian Cartesian model. And Jung indicates the problem of a causal relation according to the mechanistic model of scientific law and brings a causal relation between mind and nature into his discussion of synchronicity theory. And then that a causal relation of synchronistic phenomena is rooted in a non-Euclidean way. And Kim Il-woo's, I think his Zhang Yu's thoughts can be some philosophical source for supporting Jung's idea of synchronicity instead of Kantian epistemology that he used, or the Chinese I Ching itself. So, but this is just the beginning stage. I want to develop, if I have a chance, this kind of a comparison between the I Ching and also White Hat and this, the Kim Il-woo's thoughts. So probably some controversial issues here. Yeah.
Would you like Zhang Yu in Chinese character? Please.
What?
Would you like
Oh, yeah.
Zhang Yu in Chinese character?
Zhang Yu is right. That means right. And Yu is just change. So in other words, Zhang Yu means a right interpretation of I Ching, if I interpret it.
No. 번역한다, 역.
No. Yang means change. In language, change. So, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. 네, 이 박사님 리스폰드 하시겠습니다. 오케이. 마이크 필요 없어요?
Let me just say a few words about the locations out of which I speak, so you have some understanding as to why I raise certain questions and highlight certain points. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I think that is the reason that I was asked to be a respondent to the session. I am an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church. I came as an immigrant to the United States in 1974. Now, all of my secondary education has been completed here in the United States. And so Professor Go had his manuscripts ready in both English and Korean. I just could not make sense reading his Korean manuscript, and you know why. But I appreciated very much the reading the English manuscript. It is a short, misleadingly short and simple paper in my reading. However, the implications are far-reaching and challenging intellectually, from the foundation of the academic enterprise to the application of knowledge, at least in my reading. The paper raises many important and serious questions for me, and I hope to address some of them in my response. The paper has not so much to do with psychology or psychological process. And so I wonder whether I am really the right person, who can do this. The paper rather addresses under epistemology between the West and the East, or it addresses really the politics of knowledge in my mind. And pardon me when I use the East and West, it's an extreme gross generalization and very stereotypical representation of how we go about knowledge. So please have that understanding. The paper challenges directly, at least in my view, the Western epistemology that is based on a dualism that views that logic and rationality are supremely important. And in doing so, we have neglected other dimensions of human experience and interpretation. I think it points out the politics of knowledge in which we have privileged the Western way of knowing over the Eastern way of knowing for a long time. The Eastern way of knowing highlights in this paper includes paradoxical logic as represented in Jung's theory of synchronicity or in I Ching. The balance, the notion of balance, and that really becomes contradictory to the Western way of knowing, which is very much based on the dualistic way of understanding. It points to the fact in my reading
that there are different forms of dualism. And I think it is one of the significant points that Professor Go is trying to make. In our Western way of knowing, we value the conflicting dualism. What is true cannot be false. It's either this or that. So the notion of balance is very difficult to get from this conflicting or contradictory dualism. And Professor Go seems to highlight very loud and clear that there is a different way of understanding dualism, which includes complementary dualism. That it can be this, it can be that, it can be both this and that at the same time. In doing so, Professor Go seems to advocate that the Eastern philosophy, as represented in Kim Il-woo's thoughts, can be non-hierarchical, and that seems to be one of the most important contributions of Kim Il-woo, in contrast to Chinese thinkers, without having to privilege any social arrangements that have to do with differences of your race, class, gender, and other hierarchical social arrangements. And so, very briefly, I would say that the question, if we can represent the differences via which we can obtain knowledge, if one way is either or, and this is a very simplistic representation, and let's say that that is Western way of knowing, and Eastern way of knowing may be both and,